Hey everybody, this is Kevin, and I'm today with amazing guest Mohamed Krid and my co-host Yassine, and this is the Data-Driven Supply Chain Podcast. Let's begin with a quick introduction from our guest today, Mohamed. So the mic is yours. Who are you? What do you do? And what bring you with us today?
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for having me in Yassine. So welcome to the call, and thank you very much for having me. My name is Mohamed Krid, background in mechanical engineering from McGill University, graduated in 2018. And then ever since I started my career, I went into aerospace, stayed there for a year, worked with Avia Aerospace Systems that was in collaboration with multiple clients in the ecosystem. And then after having stayed there for close to a year, I got an opportunity to switch and go into consulting, Workday Finance Consulting in particular, with PwC. So I took that opportunity because it was a good segue into learning more about businesses and processes and just change management in general. Got into PwC in 2019, January 2019. They shipped me to Chicago for training for the ERP functionality. Stayed there for a month. I don't know if you guys heard about the period that 2019 January was the coldest period they've ever had in over 50 years. Literally, planes were not taking off. And I was there during that time. That's how lucky I was. So got started my career there, got certified in core finance, and came back to Montreal with brand new certifications and qualifications. As soon as I got back, I got certified in additional work streams, and the first ones that I actually got were pertaining to AP, so accounts payable, everything related to procurement. We're talking about suppliers, taxes, and then I got certified in inventory, so supply chain management, material management, and just overall structure of the organization with the material movement structure. Got started directly with multiple clients as per consulting agencies. Stayed there for over 3 years, got promoted, did the whole 9 yards, had the opportunity to work with a lot of big organizations in Quebec. And basically, I could name a few: FTQ, SSQ, Cogeco, and in Ontario, and multiple other provinces in Canada. And before I actually joined a US practice, so Mercer Canada was the practice that I joined, working 100% for the US. So after having left PwC, I just picked up from there and continued with my career in the new organization. Stayed there for over a year and decided that it was enough. I didn't necessarily feel the need to stay longer. I started my own organization, my own structure, and started off by getting some clients. So I've been really specializing a lot in healthcare. I've done insurance companies. I've done manufacturing, software, gaming, nonprofits, you name it. So I got exposure on quite a few industries, and that's basically where we are today, with me helping organizations in their ERP implementations, regardless of the ERP software itself. We're talking about SAP, Workday, Oracle, and obviously my functional knowledge is going to be more around the Workday ecosystem, AP, AR, and supply chain management. Those are my key areas. So doing
cool. Yeah, you're like the Swiss knife of supply chain. You can do the whole thing. We just drop you somewhere and then poof, and process ourselves. And it's funny.
Exactly,
It's funny, Kevin, how many entrepreneurs we get into the podcast in supply chain in general. So yeah, cool, nice to have you. Mohamed used to work with you also, and I saw you at McGill. Learning along in this engineering background. So pretty cool to have you here today.
Appreciate it.
For sure, and I do agree. Like the Swiss knife comparison is pretty accurate. And I saw also doing a bit of research that you were planning on completing an MBA. So you went for from engineering to now more the business side, and an MBA that's going to be maybe in the future plans. Can you explain?
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, my idea behind the MBA is that I still am lacking a little of experience and networking before going and jumping into completing an MBA, simply because I believe that you bring a lot more to the table once you actually get that network and that additional expertise in building structures for organizations. And then I was lacking that aspect in engineering. Engineering is very oriented towards technical and calculations and all those numbers, versus business is a lot more politics, interpersonal, functional knowledge, and understanding how an organization structure works in general. So because of that lacking financial aspect, I think adding an MBA to my overall portfolio is going to be a very good added value to my profile, and is going to help me both in my organization and future endeavors as well.
Yeah, awesome. That indeed is a pretty big value added. And I do think the same way as you were having first experiences. You go and do that program, that the MBA, you get way more out of it than just jumping straight into it and kind of figuring out with, so I do agree with you on that point. I'd like to dig a bit deeper in your current role that you have, all involved in supply chain, and just wondering, let's say you have a new clients, new contract going on. They have supply chain issue, that there's probably something you can do about it. What does your process, or the process you are typically going for, your preferred process sequence, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so it really depends on what phase of projects we're actually jumping in, right? So sometimes they call you towards the end of the project. It's because we're already like all over the place. We need a go live date within 2 months, and we're lost. We're missing hands to help. So it's a very different approach than basically coming into the project prior to the project's launching, right? So depending on the project, obviously, same approach is always going to be my process. So understanding what the current processes of the client are. What are the tools that they're using? Are we still with Excel spreadsheets and emails, or are we already on an ERP structure? So it's very different between the sizes of the clients themselves, the phases of the projects that we're jumping into, and also the business that they're running. So what type of industry are we dealing with? So if we're dealing with manufacturing for mining, if we're dealing with aerospace, if we're dealing with healthcare, it's very different, right? So some organizations have higher value items that they want to have turning around not that quickly, versus in healthcare, we don't really care about the dollar value. We just want to make sure that we actually have the necessary medicine or material in order to get the surgery over. We don't really care about anything else. So the approval process, or the DOA, when we're talking about the requisition process, is a lot simpler. We're streamlining all those steps and trying to make it as linear and as automated as possible. So just trying to understand, which industry am I jumping into? What are their current processes? Is there anything I could see right out of the bat that we could do as quick wins? Is there training? Because training is always one of the key features that hurts an organization if it's lacking. And also providing too much documentation could lose the focus of their users, right? So are we having issues with turnaround? How many people did you lose during the last couple of months? Is that one of the reasons why we're basically taking a little lag on our current processes, because those people are still getting trained? Is it natural, or is that something that has always been there and simply no one ever actioned, and we actually need to go and take a look and dig deeper into the processes? So yeah, making sure to understand the current tools that the organization has, the processes that they're dealing with, both on AP, AR, any other functional areas, and just trying to understand their day-to-day, how their business rolls, and what is required versus what is nice to have, right? That is very important when we're dealing with clients, because a lot of clients tell me, and it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to an analyst, you're talking to a director, or you're talking to someone on the floor, it's going to be totally different stories, right? So the guy on the floor is going to tell you, I want it this way. He wants to put all the blame and the responsibility on the higher ups. You validate, you approve, you do everything, and the only thing I do is place it in a box, and that's it. Versus the higher ups are going to want to delegate most responsibilities down the road, and put more emphasis on their employees taking ownership of the action. So it really depends. So yeah, the answer is it depends.
It depends. Yeah. And,
exactly.
I feel like this is this is the perfect setup to bring in a consultant usually, because
Yep.
it's the kind of knowledge about like, okay, we want to do this, we're this company, but the companies rarely have seen as much other companies set up in even in a similar industry as a consultant has. So when the person come in is able to assess and say like, I get all what all of you want, but from my experience, this is what seems to have worked better. Like that setup or
Correct.
this setup might not be the
Yep.
best.
Yep.
So I totally get it. And yes, like everything depends, and every company seems super different and custom in their need.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And also when you see that they have tools, it's going to help you in building a solution, right? So if they already have an ERP that's going and they've been using it for a while, basically you could think of building controls. Like what are the key fields that we're looking to solve issues on? And you could build controls directly into the system, making those fields required, or putting any specific controls that you see relevant and maybe improving the overall process. Not stopping the process itself, because you need documentation and everything, but putting those controls help tremendously if you have the proper tools set in place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you've mentioned about training. And what makes me think training makes me think of change management in any business.
Yep.
And when we speak
Yep.
about implementation and starting a new implementation process, I'd be curious to know what would be maybe one recommendation of tackling that issue of change management at the beginning of a project, just so people that doesn't fear you, right? Coming into the
Yep.
business can be
Yep.
quite intimidating, or like any
Yep.
any tips there?
Yeah, of course. So basically, one of the key things that I always see as issues happening during projects is key stakeholder decisions. A lot of times, we're going to have too many people implicated into decision making, or we're going to have too little. So that's an issue. Usually, you want to have an internal project management team, and you want to have your partner project management team, the consulting firm that's working with you and whatnot. So you need to identify and put all the ownership for functional areas under the name of a single person. That person is then going to have the responsibility of making sure that they communicated and included every party member of their own team into the decision making. Because sometimes what I've seen is you get the person that is signing off on the project not being implicated on the project itself. And then when the solution is out, they look at it and they're like, what is this? It's the solution that their team wanted and not what they wanted. So you need to have everyone implicated. And for change management, that is very important into identifying the proper resources, the stakeholders at the very beginning of the project, because this is going to make it or break it, because you're going to delay a lot at the end of the project. That's when everything starts to show, right? Like during the first phases of the project, your unit testing, your end-to-end testing, no one really cares because the deadline is still far away. It's 3-4 months away from the final result.
Yeah.
And as we progress towards that deadline, people actually start going into the system and testing. And it's when real people test that everything comes up. So change management is very important upfront in the project in order to get the right people implicated at the very start. And what I usually say is, give me one name. This is my go-to as a consultant. I don't necessarily need to talk all that noise from everyone else. I need one person to contact if I need something, and I need to sign off from that person.
Yeah.
You take care of your team. You take care of everything that you need, and I will push back if I see anything that is flagged, or if I see something that is outside of scope or best practices compared to what I've seen in the past.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of people, and this is during a Workday implementation, for example, because that's what I'm more comfortable with. But a lot of teams have the person that's responsible for sign-off delegating to their whole team. Their whole team asked for 20 controls on the system. You build those controls, you validate those controls with them, and everything works. And then when we're getting close to go live, the project manager tells that resource to sign off. And when that resource actually gets feedback from people, a lot of people say we're having a hard time into getting progress into our transactions because of that many controls.
Mm-hmm.
So what is required versus what is nice to have is very important to differentiate between the two. And key stakeholders for the overall project is important, both internally and externally.
That's super interesting. It made me think a bit also like classic tip in sales, which is multi-threading a bit. Also having, let's say you are in a project. I'm sure that has happened to you before. Your project, then your champion or your project manager internally quits.
Yep.
Then what? And then what do you do? How do you keep going forward, right? If you only have.
And you brought up a very good point there, because documentation becomes the sole proprietor of everything that happens. You need to have every decision making documented. Every up to speed, up to date workbooks. Workbooks are basically just the list of configurable items with the data conversion files inside of them, and so on and so forth. Everything needs to be documented and signed off at the latest and greatest dates in order to keep the project rolling if whatever turnover takes place. That is very, very, very important. You brought up a very important point out there. Yeah.
Super good tips there. So to everyone listening, keeping tracks of what's happening to make sure progress is documented. You've introduced yourself. You have a fantastic background. You've worked with multiple global supply chains. What have you seen as typical problems? Something that comes over and over again within these big organizations, and even smaller ones as well. If you have any examples?
Yep, for sure. So one of the key things when we're dealing with supply chain is the volume of location, volume of items, volume of everything. Volume becomes the enemy during that implementation, because such a high volume, people tend to basically let go of it and say, we're going to take a look at it at the very end. And what happens is, because of that high effort that needs to be taken care of day one, and they delay it and delay it and delay it until the last day, then it hits them. And that volume of data, the cleaning of the data, is something that I always see organizations struggling with. So getting someone internally to flag that requirement and actually vet the data, make sure that what we're looking at makes sense. We don't have duplicates. We have a naming convention, because from what I've seen, when organizations are going through an implementation, they have a wish list, right? They see, oh, it's the time for us to go and do a brand new implementation, and we're gonna want this. Okay, let's take a minute. We're gonna start by reviewing our data properly, making sure that what we're taking from our legacy system makes sense. We have a naming convention in place for everything that we're gonna do starting from today. And then we're going to talk about those improvements that you want to have, and so on and so forth. An implementation project is not necessarily the best time to talk about a gazillion improvements. It's time to validate your current structure, cut off what was bad, streamline it, try to automate it with the tools that you have in place. Because, for example, in Workday, you have to-do steps in a business process. So automatically the system tells to the next person, this is your action required on your end in your inbox. And then after those action items, it continues, right? There's a flow, and it is automated. So automation becomes a big, big time saver. And once we have everything structured and we made sure that our data is good, we have automated what we can automate. We have cut off what didn't need to take place. For example, I've seen organizations that had 5 levels of approval for the same dollar threshold. They were micromanaging that specific transaction type. And at the end of the project, they just came back and said, you were right. We should have just left one person approve. And afterwards, we just continue on with the delegation of authority structure. If it goes above the next threshold, another person is going to approve it. Because the more approvals you get on a system, it's not the same thing as what you had it on paper. Because on paper, you could have gone to that person and said, just sign this real quick. and then he signs it. He goes to the next person who's right next in the office, and he gets like 5 signatures in 2 seconds. When you're in a system and it's automated, it's not the same thing, because there's an inbox and those action items fall into that inbox. That person does not look at their inbox 24/7. They're probably going to take a look at it 3 times a day, especially if they're in upper management.
Yeah.
They don't have that much time to spend on approving 45 small value dollar transactions.
Yeah.
So that is something to keep in mind during an implementation. Very, very important to vet your data, streamline your business processes to make them as minimal and complete as possible, and put responsibility on the approvers. Documenting the structure of your warehouses. You need to have all of that information already existing. You need to understand your internal structures prior to even going into that implementation. Sometimes I had a hospital that didn't know what locations are inside of their building. How do we structure it? Okay, you have rooms, you have offices, you have different locations. How are you referencing them right now? We don't really reference it. Okay, well, we're going to need to reference it. We're going to need to build a structure with hierarchies that makes sense, so that down the road, when I tell you to go and pick up one specific item at that given location, that person is going to be able to go and pick it up.
Yeah.
So
But
all of that is very important. Sorry, go ahead.
The bad data part
Yeah.
is truly foundational, because like
Yeah.
it's really death by 1,000 paper cut, right? Because if you like, it's not hard in of itself to just take a bit of time and then just to do it properly for this part.
Yeah.
But it's like you have to do this for 1,000 stuff, and then the volume is like the roof, and then you're like, I'm gonna do it, and then at the end, what you have is a mess. Right? You have
Exactly,
a big ball of mess, and this is where you come in, and then you're trying to untangle this mess. But this is usually what happens when there's a lot of very small thing, right? And that no one is really owner of anything to manage that part. And it's just like we go with whatever we have, and at this point, the data become unusable at the end. You can't do really anything with it. So it's a feedback loop of bad data. People look at it like, why should I can continue adding to that file? It's just
trash in, trash out. Exactly. Trash in, trash out. It's like, not in a bad wording, but that is the issue. I've seen organizations with over 200,000 items in their system. They had the same item named 21 times differently for the same exact item, because different people didn't take the time to actually search for the item and validate that that item already exists. So what they did is they created a brand new one, right? That's the solution that a lot of organizations are seeing. And at the end of the day, that data validation is crucial, because if you just say, okay, let's go, let's load everything that we have from our legacy system into the new system, you're just taking your problems from the old system and putting them into the new system.
But
that's exactly
what's new now. It's cool. It's a new interface and all this.
And then the maintenance of this becomes a pain. It becomes very difficult. So data clearing and validation prior to doing the project is very important. It takes a lot of time. That's why I said when you come into different phases of a project, you get to help different problems, right? And
that's the interesting part that you touched on at the end, is that the way to ensure good data is this: if no one touch it, no one touch it, and it's just automatically getting updated with the right field at the right time, depending on the action of the users, then now it's perfect, because the user don't have to like spend their time currency for all of these mini micro action, but the system is just like structuring and piling up this data. And this take two things. It's take one, a good schematic understanding of your data, and two, a good schematic understanding of your processes and flow, so that there's no manual updates to be done.
Exactly. And add to that the security structure, because if you give restrictions to people that do not have the right to touch items, because in a lot of organizations, anyone could just go in and create an item. security restriction is there for a reason, and you need to identify which group of users you want to give the rights to do specific actions and which ones you want to restrict. And this is something that we always help organizations with, because at the end of the day, if you give more security to someone, for one, audit trail in big ERPs exists. So even if that person says, I don't remember having touching that, well, we could go in and take a look at the history and we're going to see your name come in. So if that person doesn't have anything to do with a given transaction or business object creation, making sure that they have the proper security setup and restricting the accesses to the people that only are mandatorily required to have access to it is something that is very important during a project as well.
And that is a super good point, and especially in today's day and age, right, where cybersecurity, and we see
Yep.
even big corporations getting hacked.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
be honest, being in a startup, small company, they didn't even thought like that such big companies could get hacked like this, right? But
Yep.
we're seeing it. So of course, then having also secured access only to the right people in the company and making sure
Yep.
it's well managed. So it's a super important point. Currently, we are also, I mean, in the manufacturing industry. If we take that the specific industry, when we speak about supply chain, what we've seen is labor shortage. This is something that comes over and over again. Have you noticed any impacts from labor shortage in your experiences, and what does that look like in your role when you go in, for example, for a new contract? You know, there's not enough people for the works ahead. Can you give us
Yep.
a bit there?
Of course. So basically, it comes hand in hand with an implementation, right? So a lot of projects, usually when an organization is starting a big project, a lot of people just disappear because they don't want to have the headache of dealing with this implementation that's going to last for over a year. And after the implementation itself, they don't want to be around for all the problems that are going to come up before we actually go back to normal, which is another 4 years.
Everybody's
Right?
just like,
This is not a joke. Yeah. One of my last projects, like that, one of my last clients that I finished my contract with them end of June, was a hospital in Boston. Okay, and we started off the project because I stayed with them for over a year. We started off the project with a team of 11 trainers. Okay, so we had in the organization 11 trainers that were helping them. Not from my organization. I'm talking internally. The hospital themselves had 11 trainers internally. I came in to support both the project overall, the validation of the data, the testing, the processes review, change management, and so on and so forth. And as time was progressing, my position was becoming more and more inclined towards helping with the training because the people were leaving. And at the end of the project itself, I was the only trainer, to put you in perspective. Okay? So when we're talking about labor shortages and those kind of issues, having qualified people around is hard, and keeping those qualified people around is even harder. So those are decisions for the organization to see what makes their employees want to stay more and the overall synergy of the organization. But one thing that is always important, regardless of turnaround, high turnaround, low turnaround, is to get the people up and running and being able to do their job on a day-to-day basis. And to do that, you need training material. You need documentation. You need video recordings. You need one resource that is going to be available for Q&As. Because that person, and this is something that I see happen all the time, when they're stuck, they're going to step away and they're not going to come back to it until maybe like 3 months from now, when we pick up that specific item and we see, okay, but this is pending from March. And no one actually actioned it because that person didn't have access to training material, didn't have access to any specific resources they could reach out to. And whoever they reached out to told them, I'm not the one that's supposed to help you. So having a structure internally to help those people into picking up the work and getting up to speed is important without necessarily putting too much burden on the people that were there prior.
Yeah.
Right? So a coaching system is important for organizations, but documentation and being autonomous in getting access to that documentation is also very important.
Yeah, decentralized training system is key when you have high turnaround. Like there's no way around it, because if it's not decentralized and it's like a few people, there's a high chance that these people leave, and then you literally have your
expertise left.
Yeah, one supplier that I've talked to told me that this phrase, and said that some companies are amnesic because they get so much like turnaround of high knowledge people that a big chunk of knowledge is gone now.
Their high talents just left.
There was no knowledge base, so this is that. So I totally agree on that part for this. And it seems like the combination of a long project with a high turnaround is deadly. Like
it is.
Like if the project is mapped for 3 years and there's that many people and the turnaround is that much, but it means that at the end of the project, statistically speaking, you should have a cycle through new people. What are the chances that this project will get done, right? So it's also
the decision maker that started off the project is no longer here. Okay, who took this decision? Wait, it was Bob, but Bob's not here.
Bob is not there anymore. He didn't like the project.
Just for curiosity, I can maybe guess the answer, but do you see a trend where X type of roles typically are there for the long run and stays, or other roles are more willing, more quitting?
I would tell you honestly, it was around the block, like everything. Maybe in healthcare, nurses were staying more, obviously, because their job implicates them less in the system. But people that were implicated with the system on a day-to-day, I've seen a lot of turnaround, regardless of the organization, right? So I've seen a lot of people getting burnt out because they had, and this is very important, this is something that I'm going to put out there, is they had their day-to-day job and the project. And the organization was telling them, that's fine, you're going to be able to handle it. It should take 10 hours a week. And we're going to give you credit for those 10 hours. When the project is over, you're going to have vacation bank and so on and so forth. You're going to be able to take them when the project is over. A year from now, project is not over. And you're still not allowed to take vacation. What happens? People start to break down. That is normal. They have their day-to-day, plus they have responsibility on a project for high stakes, and they are product owners. So for organizations, it's very important to budget realistically for the number of hours that a resource is going to be used, and identifying which resources we need to take away from their day-to-day in order to support the project fully is going to be a very big positive in the long run. Because that project is short-term. That resource's health is long-term. That resource's talent is long-term. If you lose that person because you burned them down and they simply didn't enjoy working there anymore, you're going to be lost on two fronts, the resource front and then the project front. Who's taking over then? They were the main decision makers. So I've seen this quite a lot. And this is one of the key flags that we actually bring up at the very beginning of projects all the time. Have you staffed your team enough for the project? Like, what's going to happen? Is that resource 100% on the project? Or how many percentage of allocations have you put for the project under this specific resource? Like, how many streams are they taking care of? And so on and so forth. This is something that is very important. And as a project manager, you need to basically flag this up front.
In some, and that's interesting. I've heard quite a lot of time with smaller companies, SMEs, where they don't necessarily have the budget to have someone full-time doing just that. So I feel like it can be a good warning for those who are listening and maybe at the head of a smaller company of allocating the right resources or getting that part right, because it could be a do or die, right?
And that's when you bring in additional resources, contractors. That guy is coming in to help. Like the project is not going to last for 5 years. He's coming in. He's going to be, I don't know, on time and material or 40 hours a week with the organization, and he's going to be taking over quite a few of the functional areas responsibilities. He's going to support the ones that are doing their day-to-day job and answering any questions. That way, at least the internal resources that are going to be staying around are going to be able to breathe, right? So, yeah.
And it's important here to with the optic of it, because like if you as a company you're saying like, this is a super important project, so do your day-to-day work, and on top of that you have this project. What you're truly saying is two things: either it's not like what you when you contractually said to them that like you had this amount of hour, you lied,
40 hours
actually,
a week. Yeah.
it was like that much that you wanted, or what you're saying is the project is not that important. So everything you're doing is more important than the project, which is like, then why are we even doing this project, right? So the
100%.
right mentality is like, is this project critical, do we think, for improving our business operation? Yes, it is. We're going to invest in this thing. Fantastic. We don't have the leisure of like having more headcount. Okay, let's slow down a bit so that we can then increase and go faster, because there's nothing worse than a work in progress project. It's useless. It's just wasting everybody's time. The project needs to be done, and it needs to be small enough so that it actually can get done before people start to leave.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I've seen numerous projects where people did not leave. They just said, enough is enough. Like when you have deliverables, instead of delivering, they just say, I don't have time. And that's it, right? Especially in unionized environments. If it's unionized, then forget about it. The resource that you're working with is going to tell you, listen, I have a contract that states 35 hours a week. After 35 hours, I'm out. As simple as that. I've seen this happen quite a few times. So overall, budgeting for hours and resources is one of the key things that needs to be done in order to prevent down the road issues. Yeah.
That is super, super interesting. Again, to remind listeners, if you are doing an implementation, make sure resources are resources who stays are your greatest allies for implementation project. You've mentioned at the beginning of the podcast about what are the processes and tools used inside the company when you go and work with them. You mentioned about Excels and emails. In the source to pay process, we see it every day, right? It's always there. So I'd be curious to ask you, in the source to pay process, what are the main steps within the source to pay that people have the most difficulty with, the hardest part, right, for them?
To be honest with you, each organization has their problems. Like every organization is very different, but if I had to identify something that I'm seeing a lot, it is pertaining to having the communication from the buyer team to the actual team that pays those invoices. Sometimes the accounting team and the purchasing team are on two separate planets. The purchasing team is the guy on the floor, and he goes and purchases anything that he needs for his day-to-day. He has old pricing. He has a purchase order that didn't go out. He has no documentation. And then they receive an invoice from the vendor, and accounting has to see this and match it to their books. Okay, where is this coming from? How is this making sense? And so on and so forth. And the bigger the organization becomes, the more this is important into validating that the process is streamlined and automated with minimal manual. Because at the end of the day, your books are going to be what the government is going to look at. And if you're a private or public company, if you're a public company, your shareholders are going to want to know what's happening with the money, right? So if you're an organization that is looking forward to building a brand and growing and to becoming public, that is a must. So two-way, three-way matching is a requirement. Two ways for services, so PO, invoice. If we're talking about goods, then three-way, we're talking about requisition turning into a PO, that PO getting distributed properly, not, oh, I think I sent it. I typed in an email and the vendor tells you, I've never received anything. And you go back in to check your emails and you see that you made a typo and it's been 5 months and the project has not progressed at all. So those are the kind of things that as your organization grows, you tend to accept less and less. Yep. So it's as an organization grows initially, not too much impact, especially when you have small volume items or small value items, you don't really care. But as you're growing and you're seeing the discrepancy in your books and you're seeing, we're seeing a lot more money coming out than the goods that we're potentially receiving. What's happening there? So it does play a lot in the game. But like I told you, it really depends. Different organizations are having different issues. On my end, the hospital that I've helped was having a lot of issues with their vendor list. Their vendor list didn't have any contact information. So going back to the data, when you migrate your supplier list into your system and you don't have the vendor list email address or distribution issuing options, it is going to be very hard to actually get your goods. And then when it's in the system, maintaining that huge list of thousands of suppliers is going to take a while. And when you shift your focus from one thing to another, then obviously that other thing that you shifted your focus from takes a hit. So I'm working on my vendor distribution list now. I turn around, it's been 2 months. I have invoices I haven't paid, right? So that's what's happening. And I've seen it numerous times. So depending on the organization, it's very different. They could have issues with the requisition process. So they could have the requisitioners being restricted to no one. So everyone is going to be able to go ahead and request goods. They're going to be able to purchase, pick up the phone, call X vendor and just do whatever they need to. Or you could put restrictions on your system and making it so that only specific users within the shop are going to be allowed to go ahead and actually create POs. The requests themselves can come from anyone, but the PO creation and actually distribution to the vendor is restricted to a buyer team, for example. So going back to security, going back to data, going back to all of that, different organization structures, different issues.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I see two main channels, which is internal communications and external communications, right?
Yeah.
And the last part you've mentioned about requisition, we see from time to time also just no process for requisition, right? They can come from anywhere at any time by anyone. At the cafeteria, they can come in the hall. It could be on the post on the procurement office door, right? So processes become also a major issue for many companies to have the right process in place at first. So at least you have some borders and guidelines on how you do each steps of the process, right? Or the source to pay process.
Yeah, and something that becomes even more important is that if you're doing all of this without even having a system, like the tools, when we were talking, because I've seen organizations with Excel spreadsheets in order to follow the request. Okay, but like, where's the name of the requester? How many items did he request? What was the item that he requested? And different organizations or different users are going to enter the information differently. And then it becomes also an issue with the vendor. Like the supplier takes this order and he looks at it and he's like, what am I looking at? What's the item that you're asking for? Like, and he calls back and he talks to buyers, and buyers tell him, who ordered this? And they go back to their team and they're like, okay, who needed this item? I think it was Bob, but I'm not sure. Oh, but Bob's on vacation. Okay, nice. So it becomes a circle of issues that is very tedious. It takes a lot of time away from being productive and building the business itself, versus having the proper tools. You have everything lined up in front of you. Like the user comes in, he types in create requisition. The requisition comes up with already defaulted information in it. He has a list of items that he has access to. He's going to be able to select items. He's not going to type in the item name. He's going to select existing items that people made sure are correctly mapped, correctly named in the system. He's going to pick those items in. He's going to be able to select the priority supplier because he's going to have a list of suppliers in the system that he knows I'm going to be able to find this item at that given supplier. And
Yes.
the whole process from there becomes automatic. Literally, he submits, it gets approved, it goes to the buyers, they source it to a PO, the PO gets issued with the proper email address or EDI or whatever structure you want to have to automate, because at the end of the day, automation takes away manual processes and takes away errors. So it goes out, the buyer distributes, the vendor receives 2 weeks after your product is back in, depending on how fast of a turnaround you're looking for. It could take 2 days, it could take whatever, versus this whole process would have taken weeks.
Yep.
Just internally, if the process is manual and, oh, I need this item, I send it by email to my supervisor goes in, he opens his Excel spreadsheet and starts to fill in. No, it's a different structure, different issues. Like I said, very, very, very different issues by organization and what type of organizations we're dealing with, what size of the organization we're dealing with, and what tools they're using.
That's super good advice, and it makes me think. It makes me think also of when sometimes I speak with people about processes and having tools which put some strict guidelines, right? People think, oh, and this is too strict. I like to be have more kind of liberty. But the example you just gave, having good processes, the right tools, will give you way more agility, because you're going to be able to save a huge amount of time in your operations, which then give you all back the time that you think or the agility you're losing, right? So having flawed processes, having the wrong tools also can cost some good employees, or you're just getting tired and at some point can leave. Just do a quick turnaround, or just a quick comeback about labor shortage, right? And people leaving. This is a good reason of why people are leaving, not doing value added work, just trying to fight fires and
think about it. Someone that's brand new, that's coming into an organization that doesn't have a process out and goes by emails and Excel spreadsheet, how does he know which list of users he needs to reach out to for different products? Like, just picking up on that information, he has the tools, he has everything, and then he goes into sending an email, it's not working, or that person is on vacation or whatever. It becomes a mess. It becomes a total mess. So having tools in your organization does help tremendously. And as you grow, I believe it is a requirement to grow with your tools as well.
In terms of speaking of tools, I'm sure you see from every type of setup possible, because every company has their own sets of tools. What are you typically seeing in businesses? And here it could be quite large, right? So any type of companies. What are the most typical contexts that you've been involved with?
Yeah, so basically you're going to have the main 3 big ERPs that are going to be englobing pretty much everything. So we're talking SAP, Oracle, and Workday. So Workday is going to be more on the service front. You do have hospitals, which was the original intent behind it. SAP takes literally everything with the vast range of products that they're offering, and Oracle is also similar. So depending on the tools that you're dealing with, you could have internal integrations that are already happening inside of that same product, because the vendor, SAP, Oracle, or Workday, already offered that additional feedback or that additional feature. Or you could go ahead and have integrations with other systems in order to migrate specific data from one system to another. What I see is very different from business to business. Like, my current client is dealing with their legacy system that's going to keep on running for specific functional areas, because those areas are very powerful and very report savvy in that environment, versus their other areas are lacking in those softwares. So they're migrating a lot of stuff into Workday that's going to be helping them with reporting powers. So one of the things, especially when we're talking about tools, is going to be the reports, because organizations at the end of the day want to see metrics. As they grow, they're going to want to see what's happening. Where's my money going? What's the volume of requests that I'm dealing with? Have I sold enough? What's happening with my revenues? Why is money not coming in? who's the main customer that I'm having issues with recuperating the money from, and so on and so forth. So reports become more and more important as you're growing your business. So building those custom reports internally into your ERPs, or having additional tools externally that are going to help you in building those is very, very important. And I know that Workday is very flexible when it comes to reporting and building those custom reports, and so on and so forth.
No, super interesting. You mentioned the main three, the big ERPs and all the renowned systems. Do you encounter often some homemade systems in companies you work with, and how do you work around that? Because when the company itself, and from my experience, when they've made the system themselves, they kind of have a bit they love the
preference.
It's their own system, right?
So basically, I've seen very different previous ERPs, PeopleSoft, and other ERPs as well. So what's happening is, usually if you've decided to migrate into a new ERP, you've already gone through the stages of sales and you've already understood what the product has to offer, or you're close to understanding what you're going into, right? So you're improving because that system is obsolete, or it doesn't give you as much power as you're looking for into driving revenues up, or just managing your material internally better. So when it comes to any ERPs, they've built it internally or not, it takes a lot of time to maintain and to improve. Versus what's happening now with most of the big ERPs is they already have automatic releases that are taking place every couple of months. So it's a continuous loop of improvement. And those old systems that stopped improving, like PeopleSoft and other ERPs, are having issues into catching up with those big businesses. Like Workday has releases every 6 months. Every 6 months, features that were not available are now becoming available. And they're always improving the current capabilities of the product. And the same thing is happening with SAP and Oracle. So it's about always staying on top of your stuff and always improving your software in order to not become obsolete in the market. And sometimes when you built a resource internally, what happens is the team that built that resource is probably gone. It's been 20 years. And the people maintaining that resource are working, but they're mainly doing tickets. They're just solving day-to-day issues. And you're not putting a new budget for building a brand new team from scratch that knows that specific product, because the expertise has disappeared.
And also to add on that, which is super relevant with what you're saying, is let's use Workday as an example. I don't know exactly how many customers Workday have, but the amount of expertise and knowledge about what should an ERP have as functionalities and how can they help you is, I don't know how many X times what you can do internally with your own knowledge, right? So you can get from outside, you have access to a big pool of knowledge because they build for the industry, right? So it's even more valuable than.
And you get consistent customer service that comes along with those products. So instead of having just your internal team and your guy tells you, well, I don't know, I don't have time this week or this month, I have projects that I'm working on. You have consistent availability of additional resources from your partner, which is Workday or any other ERPs. Because to be honest, ERPs are pretty much all the same process. You're going to have the main configurable items that you set up. You make sure that everything is properly done day one. You have your items, vendors, customers, you name it, clients information, employee information, and so on and so forth. The database, the data side of things that is inside your system. You're going to have your business processes and your controls, and then you basically have your maintenance, like small bugs, someone that is not here and they tested something, and for some reason their transaction went in the cloud or whatever, right? So that always happens across every ERP, but the same structure goes. It's always about validating your processes, validating the data that's coming in, validating the controls that you want to put in, and also making it as streamlined as possible and automate as much as you can to take away the human error.
Absolutely. And I have a quick follow-up question about different ERPs. And I guess if we take the two main ERPs we've discussed, they can pretty much do it all, and they could serve pretty much any type of companies. But how would an ERP be the right ERP for the right client? Is there any disqualification that the ERP provider or the consultant will do towards the clients, or do they decide how do a new client will go about selecting the right ERP for them?
So some ERPs are basically built in a way that they are stopping some functionalities from taking place. So for example, an example of that is in Workday, the system has been built for internal items. Inventory module, the supply chain management module, is built for internal management. So I'm purchasing my goods, I'm keeping them internally and not under the impression that I'm going to be selling them. So the sales modules, the customer modules, customer contracts modules, does not talk to the inventory module.
Okay.
They are not linked naturally. You're going to have to do workarounds, building integrations to transfer that inventory item into a sales item and being able to go ahead and sell it for a profit. So that's just an example. Different ERPs are going to have different business processes, and those business processes, depending on how they're linked, are going to make it work, or you're going to have to build a bridge by yourself to make it work.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So there's some types of companies who are not going to match every ERP system.
Exactly.
They have all the functionalities by title. Then when the processes, it needs to be well defined. I see. We're getting towards the end. It's been a super good conversation. The amount of knowledge you have so far, I've learned so many things. I have so many notes on my sheet.
Yeah, me too.
You've mentioned at the end helping many companies. What are the typical, or maybe twofolds my questions? So what would be the main impacts you're going to provide on the company? And let's start with that. What are the main impacts or software implementation that the company is going to benefit from?
So the first thing is always going to be about processes, because we always want to validate and make sure that for the next 10, 15, 20 years, your processes are going to change, obviously, but at least you're making them as streamlined as possible and optimizing your system as much as possible. Like trying to have everything automated that we can so that your overall performance is up there. Okay, so first off is trying to cut down to the very basics. Try to get only the requirements, not the what I would like to have, not your wish list. We want to have the requirements up front. So identify the requirements for your business processes, identify the controls, what your organization needs to have in order to be able to even build reports, in order to even be able to bring out the products and purchase and so on and so forth. What is required from your business right now? So we get that information in as early as possible. So we get that into the system, we get configured, and then always about the data. Data is tremendously important. You need to be with them and help them in understanding what is the power of the tool that you're building for them and how they could optimize it. Are we going to start off with putting all the information that we have, if we even have it, into the system, or are we going to be building on top of it? Because there are multiple features within an ERP that are going to be able to give you additional depth, additional information, and additional configuration power from the same exact item. For example, in Workday, you could build a purchase item just with an item description and a spend category and very minimal information, the unit of measure and whatnot. Or you could go ahead and put alternate item identifiers, meaning you could put manufacturer name against it, you could put links to supplier websites, you could put priority suppliers, you could pre-map the pricing of those supplier items directly in your system. You could build so much. If it's an inventory item, you could put the default locations, you could put the sites in which you're going to be finding it. How is it going to replenish? Is it going to replenish automatically? Is it min max? You could go in detail and leverage that tool to maximize everything that you can. Or you could really use just the very basics of it, because my requirements is strict to the point. I need an item name that is with a naming convention that we have identified upfront. I need my spend category, the pricing, and the unit of measure. That's it. So depending on the business, like I said, validate the requirements. what is absolutely needed before getting started versus my wish list. Because if you start working on the wish list first without getting the basics right, you're going to be turning in circles.
Yeah.
And the project is going to take forever, and a lot of people are going to be frustrated.
And it reminds me as well of a previous webinar we've done, where keeping it to the basic at first allows you to see progress and celebrate these progress, so you can have the momentum going. And then once you have the momentum going, you just go faster and faster.
You could
always
add on top of it and improve and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's an iterative process. Second thing is, give me the names of the people I need to talk to. Give me the names of the people I need to reach out to. Who is going to be the key stakeholder signing off on anything and everything in this project? That is a list that you need to get day one. And that list needs to be updated every single time there's a change. Because I don't want to reach out to someone and he tells me, I'm no longer on this project, figure it out by yourself, because it has happened. And then timelines are crunchy. Like, you don't have 25 months to get like one load completed. You have 1 week. And in that 1 week, if that person disappears on you, then who are you reaching out to? Because that person needs to pick up, do the work, explain it to him, because he probably doesn't have any idea what's happening, and get a result out of him. So it's very, very important to actually identify those. And last thing is user readiness. Building a plan for your users to be ready for that implementation to go. If upper management is all aware of the party is going on Friday, but the rest of the team only hears about it on Friday, you could imagine that the rest of the team is not going to be happy not being at the party. So getting everyone on the same page and giving them the tools and the resources in place to actually be able to get up and running as soon as that date comes along is very important. And at that point, you can't do much about it, because you're not going to force someone to go into the system and do testing. You can't force someone to read through the documentation that you gave them. That is up to them to do. Like, you give them resources, and then it's up to them to validate if they want to be part of your organization and they want to work and improve themselves, or if they want to become obsolete like the softwares and be pushed away by the new, greater, and newer version out there.
Yep. Wow, that's super great explanation. And my second follow of that question was about a bit more about you, that personally, which is, what do you love the most about what you're doing when you do an implementation? Like, what are you looking forward to, right? Because I know for them, it's kind of the go live, having everything automated.
Yeah, everything is rushed and so on and so forth. Yeah. They're just stressing. Like, I love coming into that situation, seeing that everyone's running all over the place and having actually a plan of action. Like, because people, when they tend to stress and they don't know what to do anymore, because priority of operations is all over the place. Like, no one tells them, okay, you need to finish this first, and then we action the second step, and then the third one, and so on and so forth. Because I've gone through this multiple times. Like, I've done this over 17 times. So you get the idea behind what a project is going to look like. You know where the project is right now, and you're going to see the potential steps that need to be taken in place in order to actually get to that delivery date and make everything happen. When you start freaking out and not taking action, you're just losing time. Versus taking that person and saying, okay, let's actually start by doing baby steps, actioning this list. I want by end of day, you finish this, this, and this. I'll review with you today in the evening, and we'll go over any questions that you have. Tomorrow morning, I want those documents available and ready and up to get the job done. So having that project management approach and actually telling people, we need a plan, and here's the plan. Not just saying, okay, how are we going to do this? Like, I need to come up with the plan and tell them, okay, so you're at this phase of your project. What is deliverable? What is the timeline? And I'll build a plan with you, and I'll do the follow-ups to make sure that that plan is actually completed. So taking that freaking out client, helping them to actually action their action items, and then seeing the product up and running and then optimizing that product with them is what I love. Because you could see how an organization went from literally having no processes and having such a hard time into understanding what the heck is happening, into now having reporting capabilities that are even outside of what they thought was possible. They could start building on top of their existing new product, and they just get better and better and better as time progresses. And because you've been there and you've understood their current processes, if they started prior to you jumping in, you could start giving recommendations of maybe you didn't think of doing this. That would be a good improvement to your systems. Have you built the training material? What is the functional area that you're seeing your users struggling with the most? So I'll build that training material for them and just schedule some calls. And for those people to jump in, you're going to have a recorded session with me and the main key stakeholders from your organization. We're going to go over the step-by-step guide, and we're actually going to take on questions. If you have anything that you're confused about, I, as a functional expert, am here, and your project owner on the client side is there because he understood the business because he's been there for 10 years. And we're able to actually get everything into a single call. And if you didn't attend because you were busy, you have the recording.
Yep. I love the answer, and that can give also a hint of people listening. If you feel like you're freaking out right now during an implementation, that's normal. That's a good tips. You should call Mohammed, and he's going to be the one to help you out.
It's like I said, resources on a project. And sometimes you jump in and you see the project and you see why people are freaking out, and you understand why people are freaking out. Mm-hmm. The guy is doing 80 hours a week.
Yeah.
He's starting off at 6 a.m. and he's finishing at midnight every day. He has kids that he needs to go and pick up from the kindergarten. He needs to take them back home, shower them, feed them, and then he's back on the computer until midnight. And he's been doing this for a year, and he didn't have the right to take any vacation because it was during the implementation, and he was one of the key stakeholders.
Yeah, that's I mean, just hearing about this, and like, of course, it happens, and I'm sure it happens more than we can think of, and it's just that from the get-go, if you're planning, you've mentioned it about planning the resources and what are going to be the implication for the team. Again, let's make sure that everyone can have a steady and for a longer period of time, steady amount of work that they're gonna to have a successful implementation. That hour and 15-minute discussion has been super interesting. I have many more follow-up questions, but I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm sure we can maybe do a round 2 at some point if
for sure.
So I'd like to first thank you to taking the time with us. And where can you find you? How can we reach out to you? Anyone that have any questions or like to talk to you?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, my LinkedIn is just Krid Mohammed. You're going to be able to find me. My company is MAK&ZINE Inc. Feel free to reach out via phone number. I assume Yassine is going to be able to share that information with the audience and my email address for my organization directly. But otherwise, I'm always a phone call away from having a chat, obviously scheduling a call with anyone that is interested in having a discussion and just getting a better understanding of your situation, and hopefully helping you get better results, alleviate the effort from your team, and basically just get overall better project management, implementation, and functional expertise from someone that's been around and done it quite a few times.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mohammed. Yassine, any last word?
That was good.
Awesome. So that's a wrap. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for watching or listening, and see you next time.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Yassine.